Kentucky Climate Solutions Dialogue. This is a part of a global climate educational initiative named Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Jacek Jasinski, and I'm here with Josh Spurgeon. We are both from the Conn Center for Renewable Energy Research, the center that has been created at the University of Louisville to conduct and facilitate R&D on renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. More about our center can be found at conncenter.org. We both will host and moderate this event today. For this event, we have invited 3 distinguished speakers, each representing a stakeholder group important for this dialogue, including state government and policymakers, utilities, and renewable energy industry. This event would not be possible without the help and support of several other people from the University of Louisville, including social media support from James Joyce, technical support from Andrew Marsh and Mike Peak, and the communication campaign led by Betty Kaufman and Kari Mahan. Of course, the most important participant of this event is you, the audience. We thank you for tuning in, and at the same time, encourage you to ask questions for our section. We'll try to forward at least some of these questions to the speakers during the panel discussion in the second part of the event. Now, let's move forward to the program itself. We'll start with a short introductory video from the Solve Climate by 2030 project leader, Eban Goodstein from Bard College, New York.
Welcome to the Solve Climate Global Dialogues. You're participating in one of 125 events held across the planet, including in almost all 50 U.S. states, part of a global project called Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Eban Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, the lead organizer for Solve Climate. This last year has been difficult for everyone. As the world looks forward to recovery from COVID, we are focusing tonight on the most important question facing humanity. What can we do in this year in our regions to help solve climate change while supporting struggling communities that have faced widespread loss of life, economic disaster, and joblessness? Worldwide, from Australia to Kyrgyzstan, from Colombia to Malaysia, and from South Carolina to South Africa, Solve Climate audiences are hearing from local experts and young leaders about concrete steps that can really help nations solve climate change while creating much-needed jobs and incomes for everybody. The year 2020 was one of the 2 hottest years in human history, bringing with it massive forest and grassland fires, record-breaking storms and hurricanes, and relentless rising seas. Solving climate is the challenge which the human species must now face. There's hope for the future. Solutions have continued to advance. This year, China committed to building a carbon-neutral economy, while the U.S. rejoined the Paris Agreement. Solar, wind, and battery prices continue to fall, while major car companies have been rushing to electrify the global fleet. Worldwide, movements for Black Lives Matter and Me Too are leading in bringing much-delayed and urgently needed justice to the world. Time is short. We have until and do the work we have to do in our own cities and regions. For students listening, you are the leaders. Without you, the future we envision will not come. I'm asking tonight for your help. We're going to discover powerful ideas for climate solutions and climate justice and how you can be a part of the solution. But this message must reach beyond those of us who are listening right now. Would you ask all your teachers this week in every subject to make climate a class? The teacher can assign tonight's webinars homework for the students and then afterwards have a one-class period discussion. And we mean every subject, from art to engineering, psychology to business, dance to chemistry. Teachers don't need to be a climate expert to lead a discussion about climate change. The Solve Climate project has easy-to-use teacher's guides in nearly every subject and in 3 languages to help teachers make climate relevant to their class. It only takes courage. Don't take no for an answer. Ask them, why not? This is your future. You'll be surprised how many teachers will say yes and thank you. Imagine you, thousands of leaders like you around the world asking their teachers once every school term to make climate a class. That means every term going forward, hundreds of thousands, millions of students worldwide in their classes talking about climate solutions. COVID has shown how fragile our global economy and society are to extreme events. It's also shown that vulnerable people are facing the hardest, most damaging impacts. This is also true with climate change. Science has made it clear that unchecked, global warming will mean an unending onslaught of extreme events, causing untold suffering for humanity and all creatures, species driven to extinction, a planet of environmental refugees. And yet, in many ways, this is the most exciting time to ever be alive as a human. We have the tools and networks and technologies to rewire the world with clean energy, reimagine the global food system, reinvent transportation, and regenerate forests and grasslands, and be well on our way to solving climate by 2030. Tonight, we will learn how to do this in our own cities, our own towns, our own regions. Thank you for the work you will do to promote climate solutions and a just world.
So after this short video, we understand, of course, and we know how severe the problem is, a problem of climate change. Now, let's focus on a more regional aspect of this issue on Kentucky. We have 3 speakers lined up for this for presentations in the next hour. First, I have a privilege to present and introduce the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet Secretary Rebecca Goodman, who was appointed to the state's top environmental office in December of 2019 by Governor Andy Beshear. Goodman has spent more than 4 decades serving the Commonwealth, most recently advocating on behalf of utility ratepayers as the executive director of the Office of Rate Inter on both state and federal cases. Secretary Goodman has regularly dealt with social and environmental justice issues that frequently involve low-income, disadvantaged, and residential customer needs. Secretary Goodman, please give your talk.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us today as we talk about a healthier and more sustainable future. This is, as has been noted, a challenging time, and yet the technology that allows us to meet virtually shows we're adaptable and we can rise to whatever challenges we face. But certainly the most pressing issue right now is the COVID pandemic that has kept us at home and has cost the lives of more than 500,000 Americans. Over 5,000 of those were Kentuckians, and several of those were part of our energy and environment family. So it's an incredibly sobering statistic. This pandemic has robbed people of jobs and income and normalcy as businesses temporarily shut down. It required us to be very creative and innovative. And now as the vaccines roll out, it requires us to be very patient. I want to thank here publicly Governor Andy Beshear, as I'm sure you do, for his daily leadership in keeping Kentucky healthy and helping us to navigate this pandemic. We also need to thank him for his commitment to seeking disaster recovery funds for Kentuckians who were impacted recently by snow, ice, and flooding events. Those events robbed a good portion of Kentuckians of power and essential services like sanitary sewer and water for days and in some cases weeks. And it showed how vulnerable we remain to climate threats to our power supply. Our cabinet, the Energy and Environment Cabinet, responded strongly, working with Emergency Operations Center to clear trees from roads so power lines could be restored and bringing drinking water plants back online. During this past year, the cabinet has learned to work virtually, as many of you have done. It was a massive undertaking across state government. We learned new ways to conduct meetings, both internally and publicly. And I have to say, we really rose to the challenge. Governor Beshear came into office with a very clear focus. His mantra was where? Wages, healthcare, education, retirement accounts, and examples of leadership through transparency and accountability in government. He's committed himself to building Team Kentucky, a Commonwealth that's focused on the common good. He's worked daily to address, in his words, the anxieties that people worry about at the end of the day. He has helped with PPE stockpiles, creating that Team Kentucky Fund, overseen COVID utility relief funding, and relaunched and expanded Connect, our state health insurance marketplace. As he said over and over again, we're all in this together. And he's right. The Energy and Environment Cabinet's mission is to provide regulatory guidance, environmental awareness, and implement an energy strategy that brings economic benefits to the Commonwealth while protecting the environment and improving the quality of life for Kentucky businesses, for workers, and the public in general. That means day to day, we're working to increase economic development, improve the resilience of our communities, protect our natural resources, and to drive innovation while improving compliance and support sustainable business practices. We work with business and industry to achieve their energy goals and to responsibly grow jobs, and we protect the environment and thus ensure a healthy Kentucky. In doing all this, we help make it possible for Kentuckians to live healthy and prosperous lives. As part of this, we're developing an updated energy strategy, one that's going to be market-based and that will support all of Kentucky's resources, including our fossil fuel resources for the benefit of the Commonwealth. We're going to aggressively pursue innovation, energy efficiency, and promote a climate-resilient infrastructure. So simply stated, our energy strategy will focus on affordability, reliability, and resilience. Thanks to our abundant natural resources, our energy has been and continues to be very affordable. We are fortunate to have some of the lowest electricity prices east of the Mississippi. Those electricity prices are 18 to 20% lower than the national average. But when looking at economic development occurring in other states, we're seeing that energy pricing isn't the only factor that contributes to business decisions. In just the first quarter of 2021, the Cabinet's has seen exponential growth in companies that are looking to expand or build with renewables as part of their corporate promise. These companies are not only looking to layer renewable and sustainable practices into their operations, but they increasingly want a whole suite of energy efficiency and renewable technology policies and incentives made available to them. So in Kentucky, renewables account for only about 8% of our net electricity generation in 2020, with hydro and biomass accounting for most of our renewables. Solar was less than 1% of all renewable generation statewide. So we have plenty of room to be more balanced and more robust in terms of our generation mix without compromising reliability or affordability. We know that most renewable technologies are intermittent and are no substitute for baseload resources, but we also know that hybrid power plants and storage devices are realistic alternatives to help Kentucky integrate renewables into our power mix. When we look at Fortune 500 companies, all of the top 25 have made some type of emissions commitment relating to reducing their emissions or conserving energy. Our research shows us that a quarter of the world's top corporations have made commitments for credible climate action by 2030. And the number of companies making that commitment has quadrupled in the last 4 years. Looking at the S&P Sustainability North American Index, the sectors most represented are information technology, healthcare, and financial sectors, all of which have increasing needs around sustainability. This legislative session, we saw passage of House Bill 372, which would give an exemption on sales and use taxes to corporations like Amazon, Facebook, and Google if they open data centers inside the state. And sustainability, including renewable energy, is of utmost importance to these data centers and means that load growth that helps to keep rates low. So some of the Fortune 500 companies here in Kentucky are increasingly looking at their carbon goals. Humana is looking to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, which includes energy, by 2.1% year over year, and increase its waste diversion rate to 60% by the end of 2022. Yum Brands is going to shift to 100% renewable energy and make its plastic packaging reusable, recyclable, or compostable by the end of 2020. Ashland Global Holdings says that its chemical industry is focusing on natural, renewable, biodegradable, and recyclable products as consumers continue to look for quality products with a decreased carbon footprint. And Tempur Sealy International is going to reduce or offset 100% of its Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions from its wholly owned manufacturing, logistics, and retail operations by the year 2040. So added to all that, there's also a heightened interest in the automotive industry, in electric vehicle manufacturing, in cell battery and electric battery assembly operations, as well as in the supporting supply chain. And they all want renewable energy for their operations. Consider that Germany's BMW took the plunge and set a goal to reduce its carbon emissions per car by at least 1/3 by 2030. Ford has announced that the company will become carbon neutral by 2050, and that it will also sell only electric cars in the UK and Europe by 2030. Volvo has pledged to become carbon neutral by 2040. General Motors has set 2035 as its target to provide all electric vehicles. And this is all part of an industry-wide transformation to fight climate change. And it's also a way to meet changing consumer demands. Estimates are that electric vehicle ownership will balloon to about 125 million electric vehicles worldwide by 2030. And that's a big jump from 2017 when there are only about 3 million vehicles in use. With all of these electric vehicles, we're going to need a lot of charging stations. And so the president has stated that he wants the U.S. to build at least 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations over the next decade. Our sister state, Ohio, this month announced that it was awarding more than $3 million in grants to support the installation of more than 500 electric vehicle charging stations across the state. And 6 of our major utility companies in the U.S. are joining forces to create a new EV charging network on major highways along the Atlantic coast, throughout the Midwest, and in many of our southern states. They formed the Electric Highway Coalition to provide electric car owners with a seamless network of DC fast charging station that spans their respective service territories. American Electric Power, Dominion Energy, Duke Energy, Entergy Corporation, Southern Company, and the TVA, which make up the EHC, are estimating that 18 million EVs will be on U.S. roads by 2030. And here in Kentucky, out of our $20 million Volkswagen mitigation settlement, $3 million is being allocated to zero emission vehicle equipment. And based on information we received from the public, we're recommending that 75% of those funds go toward the purchase of DC fast charging stations to be placed along selected highways throughout Kentucky to help establish that unified electric vehicle corridor. The remaining 25% of the funds is going to be used for level 2 charging stations at Kentucky state parks and municipal government locations. But increasingly, some of the cabinet's key work has focused on sustainability. Since January, EEC has met with or provided detailed assistance on approximately 21 project leads, including the agri-tech sector, the manufacturing of electric batteries and hybrid EV autos, solar farms, e-waste recycling, alternative fuel source production, and renewable byproduct manufacturing. And this doesn't count numerous conversations we've had with existing companies that are looking to expand or modify their existing process. So what are future companies looking for? A workforce that understands sustainability and knows how to find solutions around energy efficiency, renewable energy, zero waste to landfill, and zero water discharge. And we have to create pathways to help these corporations achieve their goals, including carbon reductions. We have to have utilities in the private sector offering goods and services to meet the needs of these industries, from building automation, data analytics, energy management systems, meter management, and behind-the-meter solutions. We need to see energy as a service where customers pay without having to make any upfront capital investments. We have to embrace our renewable opportunities and not be afraid to talk about them. And I'm not just talking about solar, but solar does represent our largest growth segment, with over 20 merchant projects representing over 2,000 megawatts of capacity currently pending at the Public Service Commission. We've also got to be responsive to our land use concerns as well. We can preserve our essential farmland while at the same time supporting renewable development. And we know how to do it through regenerative agricultural energy projects and innovative partnerships. But even with aggressive development of wind and solar, our land use for these resources is projected to be less than 1%. So choosing the right sites or the best sites for those projects becomes even more critical. We are very soon going to release our GIS solar site suitability analysis tool to help us do just that. That tool is going to allow state agencies to qualify, compare, and rank sites based on how closely they adhere to specific criteria. So using that modeling tool, we can now find the best location for a business activity and predict its susceptibility, to risk. So a recent example of that was the modeling that we did for agri-tech. We'll be deploying that, as I said, probably next month to identify the best locations for new agri-tech opportunities throughout the state. And what better example of agri-tech in Kentucky do we have than AppHarvest, with their 60-acre state-of-the-art growing facility in Moorhead. They plan to grow 45 million pounds of tomatoes annually and employ 300 workers in a state-of-the-art high-tech greenhouse. In fact, you can find their tomatoes right now in the produce section of your local Kroger store. They produce non-GMO, pesticide-free tomatoes and cucumbers year-round in a greenhouse the size of 65 football fields, using 90% less water than traditional farming, thanks to a 10-acre rainwater retention pond and sophisticated circular irrigation systems. All of that produce that they're growing is within a day's drive of nearly 70% of the U.S. population, which reduces the diesel fuel used in transporting produce like that by 80% compared to the foreign imports that have to be trucked to the East Coast. And AppHarvest wants to be a zero waste producer. Of course, our governor wants Kentucky to emerge as a national leader in agri-tech, and we have the tools. And now we have this incredible high-tech greenhouse, and we have a very forward-thinking company to show that that can be successful here. So with responsive and responsible government, we're well positioned to provide a key location to these new businesses because of our low electricity rates and shipping options that include rail, river, and highway, and an experienced workforce. When you think of renewables, solar and wind spring to mind, but the renewable landscape has to include more than that. It's got to include renewable natural gas or methane, green hydrogen, biomass, combined heat and power, and uprating or expanding our hydroelectric potential. The fossil fuel industry has taken note. New research finds that about 57% of the oil and gas industry expects to increase investment in renewables, up from 44% last year. And about half expect to increase their investment in green or decarbonized gas. The oil and gas sector is betting that their expertise and infrastructure can give them an edge in the growing hydrogen market, and we're seeing them move toward that. Kentucky can't afford to be left behind. We have the infrastructure and the chemical industry know-how to become a dominant player as a U.S. hydrogen hub. And finally, we have to talk about resilience. These winter storms and extreme cold account for about $33 million in annualized property damage in Kentucky. Kentucky's electric customers, on average, experience 2 service interruptions that last an average of about 7 hours each. Climate change is bringing more frequent natural disasters, rising sea levels, punishing rainstorms, fires, and mudslides in areas where they're more susceptible to flooding and power outages. For certain critical manufacturers and other critical facilities, these interruptions are just too costly. And for vulnerable populations, these service interruptions are intolerable. Faced with increasing frequency of these hazards, facility energy resiliency is a top priority. You know, as we were just reminded, power loss in winter can mean a lack of heat and water. Major power outages in Eastern Kentucky impacted over 150,000 customers in the last month, and those outages impacted drinking water and wastewater facilities across the state. So these disasters and other disasters in Kentucky have highlighted the vulnerabilities that exist because our critical facilities are dependent upon our energy facilities as well. So specifically, those that depend on electricity and fuel for continuity of operations and service have been the hardest hits. In the next few months, we're going to release a microgrid feasibility report in partnership with the Smart Electric Power Alliance that's going to be focused on critical facilities. So the role of distributed clean energy resources as a mitigation measure for long-term power outage disruptions is here and now. From economic development to resiliency, renewable energy sources will have an increasing role in Kentucky, and it's up to all of us to help identify pathways and policies to support this development for a better Kentucky. We've developed an environmental justice framework in the cabinet to connect resiliency with, excuse me, my teleprompter's acting up. The other way. All right. Now, we've gone a little bit further to develop an environmental justice framework with a proposed phased implementation to incorporate a more intentional and comprehensive approach to our regulatory functions. What we propose to do is to incorporate a top-level awareness and identify responsive tools throughout the agency structure. We're going to be as transparent as possible, develop specific communication tools to enhance community engagement and empower members of the community with access to data and environmental information. As everybody has witnessed in this community in the past year, there's an outcry to examine the precepts of justice across racial distinctions. And I urge you to support our environmental justice efforts. Please get informed, get involved, make a difference, volunteer, vote for the candidates whose actions support these goals. Be a loud voice in the community. Talk to your legislators face to face. And if you can't get them face to face, email and text them. So I'm going to close here. I want to leave you with a personal commitment that we in the cabinet are going to work hard to develop a regulatory environment that both protects the environment, facilitates change in the energy industry, and attracts new opportunities to ensure a healthy economy going forward. So I thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. And I look forward to answering any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Secretary Goodman. These are very important items. We'll leave the questions from the audience for the second part of this webinar in the second hour. Now I would like to give to ask Josh to lead the second part of the talks.
Absolutely. My name is Josh Spurgeon. I'm Jasek's co-host and a fellow theme leader here at the Conn Center for Renewable Energy Research at the University of Louisville. And it is my privilege to introduce our next speaker representing a utility perspective. And this is Zachary Kuznar. Zach works as the managing director of regulated renewables for Duke Energy. In this role, he focuses on developing an investment pipeline of distributed solar, energy storage, microgrid, and combined heat and power facilities for all of Duke Energy's regulated service territories. Zach is on the advisory board of the Lugar Center for Renewable Energy at IUPUI and previously served on the board of directors of both the Energy Storage Association and NAAT-BAT International. Zach holds an undergraduate degree in chemical engineering from Purdue University and a master's degree and PhD in chemical and environmental engineering from Yale University. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Zach, and we're very excited to hear what you have to say.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Can everyone hear me okay?
I hear you fine.
Perfect. Great. Just let me know if it starts breaking up. I could always just turn off my camera. Sometimes that will mess up the audio a bit, but thanks for having me today. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of where we stand at Duke, specifically around carbon and kind of technologies that we're using to reduce CO2. But before I get into that, I just wanted to show at least where we operate. So when I talk about kind of our carbon reduction goals, it kind of puts into perspective the different makeup of our generation. So with regards to electricity, we have a pretty large service territory in Indiana, kind of outside of the Indianapolis area, and then the Ohio, Kentucky area, which is really right around greater Cincinnati. Then we've got pretty significant sizes in the Carolinas and Florida. And then this small area in Tennessee is we've got natural gas service. So with regards to electricity, we've got about 51,000 megawatts of generation. And I'll show you a little bit about the makeup of that. Natural gas service in the Carolinas, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee. And then we've really started to grow over the past few years our amount of renewable energy that we're deploying. It's still a small portion of our total generation mix, but it's growing pretty much faster than any other of our investments. We've got a number of energy efficiency programs. And then in certain states, we've also started to get regulatory approval for electric vehicle charging station initiatives. So that's, again, another piece that's starting to grow to really help with these, the number of EVs that you're starting to see really along the roads all throughout the United States. So towards the end of last year, Duke and a lot of companies have done this, have announced pretty significant carbon goals. So, and what we've said is, by 2030, we plan on being at 50% CO2 reduction. And then by 2050, down to 100% CO2 reduction. And, the path to 2030 is pretty straightforward, and I'll kind of walk through that. But how do you get there? It's really, continue to transition to lower carbon energy resources is a key portion of that. Lower emitting natural gas, natural gas, you're seeing a lot of development there as kind of a bridge fuel. We're adding significant amounts of renewables and energy storage. So we've deployed energy storage in a number of locations throughout our fleets. We have a pretty significant nuclear fleet in the Carolinas, which we plan on continuing to operate. Nuclear provides a great base-loaded zero carbon fuel. You need something, especially with renewables, to kind of help you get there. And then, of course, adopting, demand side management, energy efficiency. And then I'll talk a little bit at the end. This term that you're starting to hear are these ZELFers. These are zero emission load following resources. And this is technology that might not really exist yet, or that is early on. But renewables are intermittent, and storage does have its limitations. So you do need something to really provide that base load generation. And this could be advanced nuclear. Do you add carbon capture? Hydrogen's becoming something we're starting to get more involved in, and then long duration energy storage. So, if you look at storage now, it's, lithium ion dominates a lot of that, and that's what's used in electric vehicles, but it's got its limitations as far as how long it can store energy. But there are energy storage and battery assets coming online, or that are more kind of in the R&D phase, which, we are planning on, evolving over the next, 10 to 15 years. So if you look at kind of where we are today, 2019 over here on the upper left side. And again, this is for, when I'm showing these percentages, it's for kind of all 6 of our service territories combined. So pretty significant, gas, coal, and nuclear makes that up. We're seeing more and more renewables that we've brought online, makes up about 8%. And then we buy some energy and storage. So this is a combination of pretty significant pumped hydro. We've got, this makes up a lot of these gigawatts, but we're starting to bring online batteries. And I'll talk a little bit about those later on and where we're using them. To get to 2030, it's really, again, significant increase in gas, pretty big increase in renewables, adding 10 gigawatts, keeping nuclear online, adding more storage to kind of help balance out the renewable generation. Now, this pathway, again, the technology exists to really get to 2050 and where we want to be by 2040. That's where you start seeing these ZELFers in here, right? This zero emitting load following resources, which could be, adding hydrogen to, to combustion turbines. It could be advanced nuclear, long duration storage, so there's carbon capture of existing fossil units. So this is where a lot of the R&D we're expecting to be to really focused on. And I'm going to talk kind of towards the end on an initiative we're involved with EPRI and a number of other industries, not just utilities, to try to help with those R&D goals. And again, this just kind of shows, okay, if you've got that generation make up here, where does that get you to with regards to CO2 reduction when you look at megawatt hours being produced? And, again, by 2030, with this it's 52%. And then when you get to 2050, to get to really that close to 100% reduction in CO2, this is kind of the megawatt hours being produced. So here's just, and I'm not going to go through these individually. I don't know if these slides are going to be made available, but this is, these can all be made available to the folks listening in. Just kind of shows, how we've really grown with regards to our solar and batteries. So if you look at the red sites here, these are all solar farms that are, exist in our service territory in Indiana. We've got a couple that we've built in Kentucky. Another one is going to be in construction soon in Kentucky. I'll talk about these projects. The Carolinas, we've got a significant number of solar and battery sites. These blue sites are all batteries that we have, which are doing, I'll talk a little bit more about those in a little bit. And Florida, obviously, we've got a lot of solar that we've built down there, along with the 6 battery sites under construction as well. We also have a couple R&D sites where we test out different technologies right around the Charlotte area where we've got our headquarters. So here I just wanted to show some pictures. Here's a solar site that came online in Kentucky a couple years ago. It's in Crittenden. It's a 2.7 megawatt facility. And our service territory in Kentucky where we operate is kind of in that northern Kentucky, Cincinnati region. So, it's very urban, also very hilly. So finding good sites for solar, at least in our service territory, is a little challenging. But we found, this is an example of a project that we built in northern Kentucky. Here's another project. This is 4.1 megawatts in Walton. You can kind of see the solar panels are spaced out here. But then, I mentioned that, the land is kind of at a premium for us for large areas of solar, because to build 1 megawatt of solar, just to put it into perspective, it's about 6 to 7 acres of land. So that's pretty significant land intensity. But so what we did, this is one that we just got approval from the commission where we're literally just leasing. Amazon is building a very large distribution center at the Northern Kentucky Airport. And it's a very, very flat roof. And so, we basically approached them and partnered with them where we're leasing their roof to add about 2.6 megawatts DC of solar. And that's going to start construction later this year or this summer, and it'll be online in September of this year. And this is this is the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky Airport right here. And if you've driven by recently, you can see this building is currently under construction. So I mentioned storage. This is a picture of a drone photo of one of our sites that we have in North Carolina. It's about 9 megawatt hour battery. It's used for peak load shaving and ancillary services. Again, North Carolina had the second most solar in the country outside of California until this past year. Now it's third, but there's a lot of solar. When you have solar, you have more and more intermittency issues, and you want to shift that energy around. So battery technology is very important for that. If you look at kind of the benefits, it's improved efficiencies, enhanced reliability. We're using batteries to improve reliability at the circuit level, where we have kind of a battery asset that could island a circuit if there's a grid outage, provide backup power, and then reconnect to the grid afterwards. And it really provides supply chain for electricity. I mean, electricity is one of the few commodities that doesn't really have a supply chain where you have an inventory of it. There are certain areas, and I know Kentucky has some pumped hydro. We have some in the Carolinas, but pumped hydro is hard to build because you need giant bodies of water and a mountain to do it. Electrochemical assets allow us to really place storage either at the distribution or transmission level, and to store and discharge energy as needed. It also adds a lot of flexibility as we see more and more renewables come online. And again, like we mentioned, we've got certain projects where we're providing backup for critical infrastructure facilities. Could be used for hospitals, universities, emergency shelters, or the military. So I wanted to kind of mention one more initiative before I wrap up. And I mentioned those Zelfers that really don't exist yet. They need a lot of R&D. So we've kind of joined. Our goal is to have 50 members. We're close to 30 right now, of combination of utilities, mostly utilities, and some industrial partners as well, for this low carbon resource initiative. It's a 5-year R&D focused, led by EPRI Gas Technology Institute, to really look at low carbon fuel options. And this could be anything from hydrogen and biofuels. When you produce these, how do you transmission it? How do you transmit it, deliver, store it? How do you then end use it? So you either use it in turbines, use it in transportation, industrial and building use, and really ways to kind of bridge a lot of utilities that have these initiatives. And so far, we've raised about $120 million for demonstration projects, and we'll be evaluating and deploying some of those demonstration R&D projects over the next 5 years. And the goal here is just to share knowledge with the industry, so you don't have people doing this R&D work in silos. So just to kind of summarize, when we look at how we're going to get to this, reduce CO2 and really help with this climate report, again, our nuclear is going to be critical, keeping that online. Gas is a transition fuel to keep costs down, also to reduce CO2. Renewables will be deployed at a very high rate, but, they also, the interconnection issues that you have in getting those studied and online, having a diversity of renewables provides stability, and adding storage is going to be very important in order to really smooth out and to manage the intermittency of renewable generation. Adding transmission to incorporate these renewables. And as I mentioned, research and development of, these zero emission load following resources, electrification of cars, of heavy duty trucks, efficiency, load management, and other emerging technology will be very critical. And, obviously, to get all this, these assets deployed, implementing it through either a legislative or regulatory process is going to be important as well. So with that, I will wrap up and thank you for your time, and, we'll answer questions in a bit.
Thank you very much, Zach. That was a wonderful presentation. And I will hand it back off to Jacek, who is going to introduce our third and final speaker before we come back for the panel discussion.
Yes, so our final speaker is Steve Ricketts, co-owner and general manager of Lexington-based Solar Energy Solutions. He has been in the renewable energy business since 2015, with focus on both PV and energy storage. His company has grown in the past 15 years to be Kentucky's largest developer of residential, institutional, commercial, and community solar, accounting for over 60% of the state's operating solar installations. The company's mission is driven with focus on mitigating climate emergency, creating the next generation of renewable energy jobs, and updating policy and practical approach to energy production and distribution on a regional basis. Prior to SES, Steve was Chief Innovation Officer for Louisville-based Yum Brands, 112-country international restaurant businesses, with his original qualifications being in earth sciences and agriculture engineering. Steve, please give us your presentation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Let me just get the slides up, and then we can get going. All right. Okay. Afternoon, everybody, and thanks to the UofL team for inviting me along. As you can tell, I'm not a Kentucky native, but been here for 20 years, so I think I can just about kind of claim to know a little bit about the state now. The UofL team have asked me to bring this down to a local level to talk more specifically about solar, on a residential level, on a community level, on a local level. So you'll hear about Louisville, about Kentucky, and the area around it in general. And what we can all be doing to make a difference is probably the most important thing to take out of this. Solar is very, very personal to me and the team I work with. Most of the people who are part of Solar Energy Solutions opted in from other careers because they believe, as a global community, as a Kentucky community, we're doing too little, too late to solve a significant global climate crisis. We're a business that's mission driven. We're about solving and pushing back on a climate emergency. We're about creating a brand new economy made up of sustainable, well-paying, clean energy jobs. And we're about building the new energy infrastructure that our state and our region needs so badly to move away from legacy power supplies. We have kind of touched solar in every part of our state and in 6 other states in the surrounding areas. We've racked up something like 2,100 operating systems and arrays in really every kind of part of solar you could possibly think of. And I doubt whether there's a county in this state that we haven't done work on. So it's a pleasure to see that variety. We're a woman-owned kind of business. We've been doing it for 15 years, and I can tell you there wasn't much solar 15 years ago. So we've really seen this industry kind of come on really kind of strongly since 2006 or so. We say we're a big business. I think, to indicate how far the solar industry has got to go in Kentucky, a big solar business in this state means 30 to 40 people. So there's clearly a lot more work to be done to make Kentucky a real solar success. I'm going to just touch on the basics for a minute, because I think we've all talked about solar, and we presumed everybody knows what we're talking about and what it does and how it works, particularly in our cities and on our houses. So forgive me if I'm teaching you what you already know, but there's certainly people who don't know about the basics of solar. So let's dwell on that for a minute. The thing about solar is it's fundamentally incredibly easy. And sometimes we do a really bad job of making it very complicated. We talk to many business owners, institutional owners, residential owners, who we leave feeling like they need a degree in advanced physics before they can own solar. Solar is simple. It's something that can be done in a few days and lasts a lifetime. So for those who are still kind of fuzzy on it, it's a 30-second explanation, and that's about as complicated as it gets. We put solar panels on roofs of all types, which generate DC-based energy. Our DC-based energy flows typically to what we would call a string inverter or a small central inverter, which converts that to energy your home, your business, your farm, your church can use on a regular basis. In situations where the building on which the solar is based isn't consuming all that energy, it flows back to your utility grid. And at the moment, they give you a one-to-one net metering credit for what you have not used. Later on, when you're using more energy than your array on your building produces, you take back that credit. So the utility is banking what you've paid money to actually produce off of your building. The only thing you can add to that is a battery system, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And as was mentioned before, batteries are now on the cost decline curve that solar panels have been going through for the last 10 to 15 years. Solar panels in the last decade, 70 to 80% cheaper. Batteries are starting that. So we're starting to see an awful lot of people in the Commonwealth add energy storage to their home or business for protection purposes, to make sure that if there's a power out, they can still kind of operate on a day-to-day basis, or many other reasons we'll touch on later on. But fundamentally, panels on the roof producing energy that's converted by an inverter for you to use in your building on a daily kind of basis. It doesn't get more complicated than that the majority of the time. So, what goes on your roof? Simply, you're seeing a solar panel here. That one will produce 340 watts of power in an ideal situation. That's actually a Tesla kind of solar panel, quite attractive looking. That produces DC energy, which is taken by kind of home runs down to the inverter on the right, which can sit very happily on your outside wall in the rain and the snow, or sometimes sit in the basement. That converts the DC power into AC power, which can then go to your breaker panel and flow to your whole home or residence for use for lighting, for cooking, for drying your clothes, and out of the building if you're not consuming all that you produce on the roof. So really simple. I mean, for instance, the average home takes 1 to 2 days to convert from not being solar to almost being completely solar powered. Very rapid kind of process for most people. And these days, it's a pretty kind of smart process. I have on my phone nearly 750 views of people's homes and businesses solar around the state. If you're a solar owner, you look at your phone, you see what your home is producing, you see what your home is exporting, you know when there's an issue, you know when it's going well. So the Internet of Things is very much part of kind of solar these days. And we are connected in every possible way to what energy we're producing, what energy we're consuming, where it's flowing, and where it's going. So, it's a fascinating area with an awful lot of visibility of what's happening. For the local people, particularly the Louisville people at UofL, there tends to be a view in our city that there's not a lot of solar around in Kentucky, and particularly our city. An awful lot of solar is hidden and you don't see it. this is a very small sample of what you could walk out onto the street and within 10 minutes actually find around the city. There's projects on the map here that get up to 1.25 megawatts in size within 5 or 6 miles of the UofL. You probably haven't seen them. You probably didn't know it was there. So the penetration of solar in our part of the world is substantially better and more advanced than you would ever possibly kind of recognize. At the moment, we probably kind of accounted for about 50 to 60% of the installs in the city, but they are going in every single day of every single week. So unbeknownst to most of us, it's happening in an aggressive way. Energy storage is an area that was touched on earlier on and is happening very aggressively now. We've seen this in the last 2 years. Energy storage shown here in the old style, which was pretty daunting, to be honest, even to a technical person, was something that the majority of people avoided. It was clunky. It didn't have the longest kind of lifespan. It needed a lot of care and curation that turned it into a hobby rather than a service. Energy storage no longer looks like this. You don't have to be off grid. You don't have to live in the middle of nowhere. It's become almost a white goods home item like your refrigerator or your cooker or your washing machine. So difficult in the past. And then this small company came along called Tesla and made energy storage relatable and simple to all of middle America. And we as a company have gone from doing very little energy storage 2 years ago to every single week installing energy storage in homes and towns and cities and farms and businesses across this state. This is what Tesla energy storage looks like. It goes in hours. It stores significant amounts of energy, which can clearly back up your building or provide a reservoir for you of the solar you have paid to produce on your property. It sits there, it looks good. The most it does is it kind of pulses with a green light on the side, and you look at how it's doing on an app. So suddenly energy storage has gone from a physics project to the way you'd buy a cell phone or you'd buy a hi-fi or you'd buy a new TV. It's increasingly part of everybody's life around us, digestible and understandable. Here's an example from just from Louisville. This is a gentleman with a large home out towards kind of Floyd's Fork, and you see here 4 power walls. Each of those is 13.5 kilowatt hours of energy storage. This backs up his entire kind of property and everything he does in it. And he has a 5,000 square foot home. His lights don't go out because it automatically comes on in an unbroken, unnoticeable way if the utility goes down. He can, if he wish, and if he's on the right energy tariff, charge up when energy is cheaper and use the batteries himself during the day when energy is more expensive. That's becoming an increasing thing, particularly on the East and the West Coast. He can even decide that he doesn't want to use the utility at all, and he is going to do what's self-consume, which is store every bit of his solar and live off that solar in its entirety and have just a remaining small connection to the utility that might be used in an emergency, but 99% of the time, he or she is his own power company fundamentally. So one of the things we're seeing is people start to, what we would call, defect from the utility, cut the ties, put in solar, put in manageable, understandable, simple kind of storage, and make the choice to be their own power station and live their life disconnected from the grid. Historically difficult, much simpler and much more manageable these days. And we're also seeing a lot of businesses start to make that move as well. In the way that the Tesla Powerwall, as a battery example, is good for any of our homes or kind of college, kind of buildings or farm buildings or churches, the big brother of that is increasingly used in our businesses in this state. where they want backup power for larger production or office situations, or they even want to reduce the charges that come from peak demand. When you get to be a business, you're not just charged for energy, you're charged for the amount of power you pull at any one instant. If you've got a battery, that cuts the amount of power you use in any one instant, and it reduces your bills. So a lot of businesses are now starting to say, we'll put in these bigger battery packs, and it's looking very attractive, because whilst we may have moderate energy prices in this part of the world, our demand charge prices are towards the top of the spectrum, and it makes batteries all the more sensible for a lot of our bigger kind of commercial concerns. Couple of examples, I was asked to give about how do you go solar? What does that look like in a practical way? Well, imagine you're a homeowner or a small business owner. It's a relatively simple process. I, as a construction person in the solar industry, will typically start with a remote assessment of your property. We've got great satellite and plane coverage of every building in the US these days. And it's very easy for us to lay solar panels via design software onto your building and do a detailed assessment of how much energy that building could produce on an annual or monthly basis. Yeah, if it was your home, and in the picture here, we'd kind of lay on those kind of designs remotely. We'd do you a proposal. We'd be 95 to 100% accurate about the energy we're going to produce for you. And if you liked it, we then go to a final design, and we handle all the permitting, the interconnection agreements, the utilities, the city, the structural. We do everything for the homeowner, so they don't have to worry about this whole strange kind of construction area. We install it, and something like you see here would take less than a day, most likely, commission it, and then what you see on the roof here will likely last for 40 years. Has a 25-year warranty. That's the most common thing in the industry, but 40 years of bankable, predictable energy at the same price on day one as it is on the last day 40 years later. There's not many places you can buy something that consistent and predictable. One of the things we do, and I know we've got engineers on the call, is we do get very technical behind the scenes. And I talked about mapping kind of panels onto your home roof. Here's an example of a Louisville property that's not far off Frankfurt Avenue for those who kind of live in this area. Customer is going to go solar. We put panels on their roof. We look at snow loading. We look at wind loading. We look at slope. We look at the solar insolation that arrives at any zip code. And we can get incredibly accurate on what any building can produce from solar anywhere in our state. But certainly, a decent amount of engineering goes behind that kind of task. And it's nice to be able to talk to somebody a year on from when you've done a job and you've actually produced exactly what you promised this particular kind of customer. What are the limitations to putting solar on any home or any building? Well, there's many, and a lot of kind of fairly small. Frankly, the biggest issue and kind of break on putting solar on a property or a business right now is the unknown state of Kentucky's net metering law. With Senate Bill 100 that became kind of law in January 2020, all our utilities can now put tariff cases into the Public Service Commission. There's one going on this very day today with LG&E KU to try and degrade the value of solar. Right now, if you export a unit of solar to utility, it's on a one-to-one basis with what you've got. You paid for it. Our utilities would like to give 20 or 30 cents on the dollar if they get their rate case approved. With that degree of uncertainty, you can well understand that customers making large financial investments think twice or three times about doing it. So we're in a bit of no man's land, which is having a pretty impactful and negative impact on our industry in Kentucky. Dollar cost of solar is a deterrent and was a deterrent. It's starting to go away. Costs have decreased of a solar panel more than 70% in the last 10 years. Financing is significantly more available than it used to be. I, for one, have been reducing our kind of system costs about 15% a year for a number of years now. So it just gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The other things, and I won't go through all of these we come across, is shading is the obvious one. You can't put solar on every building. And one of the hardest jobs we have to do is tell enthusiastic people who want to do solar that their roof is not right because they've got too many trees. We're not in favor of cutting trees down. And sometimes we just have to say, no, it won't work. But we build shading into our estimates for how productive a building is going to be. And a lot of people still do it, even with 10, 15, 20% shading. A couple of examples of really nice local projects which illustrate the point. Here's a project that's only just outside kind of Louisville, which was built within the last year in a co-op, not a for-profit utility. They do not do one-for-one net metering. They give you a fraction of the purchase price if you export energy back to them. So this homeowner designed this home with a fairly small amount of solar panels to cover 100% of their needs. They designed it well with energy in mind. They have an EV, they have an electric bike, they have power walls to store energy to stop it going back to the utility for not much value. And they can get through a whole year really without having to change their lifestyle in any way based on the solar you see here, a power wall you don't see in the basement, and having two vehicles which use and are charged by electric energy. I think that's a fantastic example of what can be done if you plan and act kind of smartly. The second one, and some of you may have seen this, but some may just be surprised it's there. If you go to Oxmoor Mall, if you go to Mall of St. Matthews, that's a stone throw from Oxmoor Mall, this is what the roof looks like, and this is what big business is doing with solar. It's what we call a behind-the-meter system. It doesn't really care about net metering because that building uses so much energy. Whatever you produce on the roof here is never going to be used, is never going to kind of go back to the utility kind of grid. They've got a corporate sustainability policy for this mall and 130 other malls in the group, but at the moment is seeing nearly 50 of these type of buildings install these size of arrays across the US. And by the way, they get some great tax returns on putting this on a commercial building. So this is driven by sustainability policy. This is driven by the need to represent themselves as an environmentally kind of conscious business. I think it's a great example of the kind of thing we're seeing more and more of in Kentucky. Last kind of few slides, I was asked to talk a little bit about, well, what does this mean to jobs? Renewable energy is the first and third biggest job growth category in the US over the next 10 years, period, which really shows that solar has made it and it's not going to slow down anytime soon. The industry as a whole employs 250,000 people. 250,000 people. It is a massive industry that frankly dwarfs gas and oil, and certainly kind of coal. Employment and career opportunities are unparalleled in this sector. Kentucky doesn't do quite so well. We've got a much smaller, nearly 1,400 jobs in this sector, growing, but still small compared with the likes of North Carolina with between 7,000 and 10,000, where they've been encouraging and legislating to encourage solar growth. Smaller than Indiana, smaller than Ohio, and really. Policy drives job growth, and we've got work to do to really kind of put policy in place that will grow these meaningful jobs that are going to be around for decades to come. As we stand, Kentucky is number 47 in the US in terms of deployed solar. Our scorecard doesn't look very good in that respect, and we've got work to do. So the question I had, really, for this whole presentation that somebody asked me is, what can you ask people to do to change the state of solar in Kentucky? The reality of where we are as a state is we need to do an awful lot better. Our cities, our institutions, our companies lag behind most other regional states. But the good news is we know how to close that gap. And you only have to look across the Ohio River to find a really good example which anybody at school or at college could get involved in to really change the solar landscape in a radical way. On the left here, you see solar installs in Indiana in 2015, residential principally. On the right, you see solar installs in 2020. There are 3 times as many installs across the state between 15 and 20. The growth has been exponential in the extreme. Some of the fastest solar deployment growth anywhere in this part of the country. Kentucky would not look like that. So how did they do this? They have got local activity and passion around growing solar. There are now 17 community-driven solar co-ops in Indiana that negotiates with the solar industry, particularly small and medium installers, to provide up to 20% discount in solar for their metro areas. And you wouldn't believe the uptake that drives when you have informed and passionate people driving cut-rate solar that's put in kind of well in all of these city locations. Indianapolis is doing it, Terre Haute, Muncie, Bloomington, South Bend, you name it, they are all kind of doing it. And some of these organizations like Solarize Indiana, Solar United Neighbors in Indy and Carmel and Muncie and Anderson, even in the coal fields of Western Virginia, are bringing like-minded people together and putting solar on roofs by the thousands of properties. If you want to do something, get involved with one of these groups, bring it to Kentucky. It's really easy to do, and help Louisville, Lexington, Bowling Green, Covington, wherever they may be, do things that these other states have done successfully for years, but Kentucky has not managed to do. Let's steal and apply what works. And I can tell you we've done many of these kind of campaigns. It works and it gets solar on roofs quick and cheap. I can tell you how to do this if anybody's interested. Lastly, what's holding solar back in Kentucky? I think to flip that question, solar is building strongly in Kentucky. TVA has just announced the state's largest solar build of 145 kind of megawatts. So good things are happening, but we are in a monopoly utility state, which makes citizen solar, institutional solar, church solar, farm solar very hard to execute sometimes. You can't do community solar in this state because it's a monopoly state. You can't lease solar in this state. You can't have solar on your farm and apply it to your home in town because it's not allowed in Kentucky. You can only put fairly small solar arrays on because our net metering cap is one of the smallest in the state, in the country. And we have an artificially low limit on how much renewable energy can be put on the grid at 1%. So, there's a lot that holds us back, but it is a strongly kind of growing industry. And, we're hoping that, based on what we see businesses asking for, what we can hopefully get done at the PSC and in kind of Frankfurt, we can turn this ship around and make Kentucky not 47th in deployment of solar, but 27th or 17th in the deployment of solar, and we'll be here doing it. So lots to do. Proven examples of what works in other states we can certainly import at the community and local level, and I really urge everybody to get involved because our house is burning and we need to be solving this sooner rather than later. Thanks.
Steve, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation and especially for bringing up what are the issues, how people can get involved, what needs to be done to help the growth of solar and renewable energy in general. These are very important points, and I hope that this dialogue is the first step in the discussion between the utility, the state, and the industry to address these issues and to solve these problems and help to address the needs of the state of Kentucky. This concludes our first part of this dialogue, where we have the presentations from our distinguished speakers, and now we will move forward with the panel discussion, where hopefully we'll get more questions from the audience on our YouTube chat. In meantime, we have a number of questions prepared. I know that Josh has several questions for the speakers, so maybe he can take it from here for now.
Sure, I'd be happy to ask one of the first questions or two, but like Jacek said, to anyone following along on the YouTube channel, we encourage you to put your questions into the chat box, and hopefully some of them will be relayed to us and maybe we can ask our speakers. But let me pose a few questions to you guys, and I might have questions that go to one speaker in particular, but after they have the opportunity to reflect on it, we certainly want all of our panel to weigh in. So, perhaps I'd start with Secretary Goodman as our representative from the state government. Steve Ricketts just mentioned to us some of the importance of net metering for the solar energy companies. I'm wondering, Secretary Goodman, if you could explain very succinctly again for our students who are watching exactly what net metering is and what's the current status of that in Kentucky, and what's the state government's policy on it going forward. Oh, you're muted still. Sorry, Secretary.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Certainly the Public Service Commission mostly has jurisdiction over that. And of course, any kind of rate-making function, including net metering, is the province of the legislature. And that was decided by the U.S. Supreme Court 100 years ago. So any kind of changes to our net metering law have to come through the legislature. And I think Mr. Ricketts was spot on when he said, you know, it's not a favorable climate right now. Utilities would like to give less and less and less. And that's because the cost they have to provide energy is stranded cost. And they need to have as many ratepayers as they can who pay into that cost. So it's not necessarily very favorable, but we're very optimistic because, as I said earlier, most of the contacts we have with existing businesses who want to reduce their carbon footprint, they want solar. And so we're seeing manufacturing drives this state. I think that's no surprise to anybody, but if the manufacturers in the state want it, I think the legislature will eventually be responsive. They are not quick though, so.
Thank you. Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in on that? I'm curious, Zach, if you have any thoughts from the utilities perspective you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert in like the Kentucky net metering rules. Just because we've got like folks who kind of focus on like the policy in each of the states, and my group kind of really focuses on development throughout our 6 regulated territories. But to what Secretary Goodman said, I do know that the rate that is paid to the person doing the net metering is set by the Public Service Commission.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, I mean, I think we clearly have to be, understanding of utility costs in supplying energy to a homeowner. Absolutely. I mean, I always look at the history in other states where PSCs have continued what is a fair net metering kind of approach. Mm-hmm. And, generalizing certainly, but the vast majority of states that have gone through this have found it to be a complex process. They typically asked a third party to get involved in assessing what is the value of solar. If you buy energy at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, is it worth 10 cents a kilowatt hour, when it goes back to utility in a one-to-one basis? Most states have found solar is worth the same as the retail price of electricity. in general. Some when they consider further social costs of either healthcare costs or land kind of cleanup or stream pollution abatement, say solar's worth an awful lot more because it removes the needs for those costs. But just being very hard-nosed on an engineering or physics basis, most states have said it's about a wash. Solar's worth what you pay for classic energy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, all right, let me take another question then. Okay, so to Zach Kuznar, I'm curious from a utilities perspective, this is kind of a general question, but one that might be good for our audience. What do you think is the biggest misconception that the average person would have about renewable energy as it relates to the grid and how a utility has to manage that renewable energy?
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things we hear a lot, and we've dealt with this quite a bit, is just, the thought that, adding solar and battery storage is going to be able to provide all the electric. It's just not the case. I mean, it's definitely a piece of the equation. Solar and wind and energy storage are a big piece of what we're deploying at Duke, but you do need some sort of baseload generation to meet the times when, you have a polar vortex or, battery technology is just limited right now. Lithium ion, duration wise, you can't really go much more than 4 hours, but there are technologies that we are testing. We're testing a zinc-based technology. We're looking at flow batteries, which have longer duration. But I think that concept that you're just going to have solar, wind, and batteries, and you're going to meet all the electric needs for the grid, that's just not the case. But it will be a large piece of to get there. But it is a piece of it. I mentioned we're keeping our nuclear online. We're adding more gas as a bridge fuel. We're really focused and spending a lot of time on R&D around, fossil or fuels such as hydrogen and biofuels. But it's going to be kind of a bunch of those different technologies. There isn't just one answer for all of it.
Let me follow up a little bit on that then with something that you just said. You mentioned keeping your nuclear online. That kind of was interesting to me when I saw that in your presentation. One thing I have is I'm curious, what are your thoughts on not just keeping your existing, but expansion of nuclear as a way to maintain low CO2? And then also to follow up with that, I noticed you had on your 2050 plan, still having that existing nuclear. And if you don't build any new nuclear, what's your thought as far as the lifetime of that existing nuclear? When would it have to phase out?
Yeah, I'd have to check on each of those. I know they were just extending the license of the new. It's kind of interesting that, like, when you look inside a utility, nuclear is definitely its own business, in the way it's managed. But I know they just, we do have an extension for those facilities. Do I think a brand new nuclear of those size would be built? I think it'd be tough, just due to like the permitting and the cost. But one thing that I know there's a lot of attention on, and I'm not necessarily involved in it, are these kind of small modular nuclear reactors. Is definitely a technology that's getting a lot of attention within Duke. It's just not my area of expertise, but I do know that following that technology and, exploring how that could, again, be coupled with, increases in solar and storage and wind and, hydrogen and biogas, how they could kind of all work together. But the small modular reactors are a technology that, from our kind of emerging technology and kind of evaluation group, they're definitely keeping an eye on as could that be a potential base load of generation that gets deployed.
Curious, Secretary Goodman, do you have any comment on that? What's Kentucky's policy with regards to those sorts of nuclear as a way to keep low carbon emission energy?
Well, my policy is not the same as the legislative policy, obviously. I would love to see it developed in Kentucky, but we have no nuclear in Kentucky. And we have, in fact, a statutory moratorium on nuclear power in Kentucky. So until that's lifted, it's not something that we would be able to look at successfully. However, I think some of our neighboring states are doing all the testing for us, and it's looking very promising, and we keep an eye on that. So hopefully in my lifetime, it will happen.
Jacek, do you want to read any of the YouTube questions?
Yes, so several people have asked about any tax credits or incentives for installation of renewable energy sources. I assume solar mostly. Whether there are any plans, maybe Steve or maybe Secretary Goodman or knows anything about such tax credit for the public.
We just had a bill passed in the General Assembly. It's not necessarily a tax credit for solar, but it's a tax credit to encourage those large data centers who are very heavy users to locate in Kentucky, the Amazons and Googles and Facebook. And we've had inquiries as that bill was running through the legislature. We have been contacted by 3 companies out of state or 2 companies out of state, I think, who are very, very interested in what the tax climate will be here. So they do get some tax benefits from locating here, but they're not necessarily tied to the energy usage.
Right.
Yeah, and there are,
go ahead.
Now I was just going to say, you probably get into more details, but yeah, I mean, there are federal tax credits for solar and then production tax credits for wind. There currently aren't any tax credits for energy storage. There are if you pair it with a solar asset, but there are the concept of a tax credit for energy storage is introduced to Congress quite a bit.
So can I have a follow-up question for Steve? So what's typical cost of a household switching to solar energy and energy storage installation? I mean, because there is a capital cost and then maintenance cost, and how long it takes to basically be even compared to the utility costs.
Right. I mean, I'll certainly answer that. Just to finish off on the tax one, there's probably 3 places this could be relevant to people in Kentucky. On a residential basis, you would get a 26% federal tax credit off the gross cost of any system you put on your home. Yeah, if you're a business, and we do a lot of work with small and medium businesses, you get that 26% kind of tax credit, and then you get opportunity to apply IRS sanctioned rapid depreciation on your business of that capital, which makes solar pretty attractive to a small business, particularly when a lot of the small businesses are on the most expensive energy tariff that we're typically of a utility, just above residential. So where home can see between a 10 to 12 year break-even time, if you want to talk about it like that, at the current time, a business can be as low as 7 to 8 years when it's applied those 2 levels of federally available kind of credits. The third one is one that's not so much talked about. It's not so much a tax credit as a grant, is what happens in the agricultural sector. Working with the USDA, which a lot of our farmers are doing, and solar is surprisingly important to farmers. Most people don't think about it. Who are running chicken operations, hog operations, grain drying kind of operations, even to the big guys like App Harvest. You can apply for a 25% USDA grant that goes on top of the other federal credits. And even then, they have a low interest loan program on top of the 25% grant. So I've seen large agricultural operations be able to put significant solar in and see it pay for itself in 4 to 5 years sometimes.
Yeah.
So our agricultural industry should be looking at it a lot more than they are now, to my mind. On the home question, I'd say an average home price would be somewhere around kind of $18,000 to $20,000, off which you then take that 26% kind of federal kind of tax credit. So probably around $14,000 to $15,000 kind of dollars, and with a 10 to 12 year break even on something that's going to last you 40 years or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds pretty attractive, actually. I have also one more question. So can people, for example, agriculture farmers contact your company for consulting or maybe estimate of an installation?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great install companies around that doing a farming estimate, a business estimate. is a no-cost, simple process that takes a couple of days. So it's very simple for anybody to get a view on, is it right for them or is it not? And, always get multiple quotes, look for a reasonable kind of company, but you'll discover often that it's a really attractive thing to do, both environmentally and financially.
Okay. I have one of the questions we've been getting in various forms is if some of our speakers could expand on plans for the state to how we might mitigate climate change impacts that are happening. And that building on that, sort of in that same frame, Secretary Goodman, you mentioned the state having an energy strategy focusing on climate resilient infrastructure. I was wondering if you could expand a bit specifically on what that actually means and any other policies we might have for how to deal with climate change impacts that are happening.
It means a very broad suite of options, but I think when we went through the last series of storms and realized, and it wasn't the first time we'd ever realized that, but we're a relatively new administration, and our first year has been rather consumed by COVID. So we're just now getting started on that energy policy or that strategy to address some of these. We have an emergency operations center, and through our lessons learned through the utility component and the emergency response component and the energy component of that emergency operations center, we figured out that we have a lot of gaps in our data. We have a lot of gaps in our knowledge. And so we're working on that resiliency piece right now to try to, connect. Some energy utilities had no idea where our water plants' actual pumping stations were. They had no idea what the meter number was. Those pumping stations went down because there was no electricity to actually pump the water. And so we have people who were without water for 10 days. So, it's things like that I think are going to be a patchwork right now while we work on overall goals to try to talk to the legislature about stimulating use of renewables. And we also want to pursue some dialogue with stakeholders about hydrogen. So hydrogen may be a big option for Kentucky. We have the chemical know-how in the western part of the state. So, and certainly we want to build out the CO2 pipeline infrastructure. We have some sources of CO2, some very large sources of CO2 in the state. So things like that we're working on right now. We're not as far along as we'd like to be, but we're working hard.
Okay, I'd definitely like to follow up on that since you finished by talking about hydrogen, and that's kind of my personal area of expertise. So I'm curious for all the members of our panel, what role they could see hydrogen playing in this mix, because it's not typical energy storage, but it can serve some of the same role. And I know I might start with you on this, Zach, because you mentioned it as different from energy storage, instead what you were calling ZELFers, those zero emission load following. And I'm wondering first if you could really clarify what's the difference. Why is a battery different than hydrogen in the way the utility looks at it? And what do you see as the overall promise for hydrogen in Kentucky? And then maybe, Steve, you could follow up with that as to how hydrogen technology might be coupled with the solar business.
Yeah. I can take a start at that. Yeah. So when I refer to the batteries, I mean, what I was really, the batteries that I was talking about are really lithium ion, electrochemical batteries that are, maybe located at a substation or a transmission line that just would store electric from the grid and then, push it back onto the grid at a later time, or that would manage the intermittency of solar generation that we already have. And so the hydrogen work we're doing, I'd say through that LCRI, that's more of a industry-wide collaboration, but some of the hydrogen work we're doing right now, we're looking at, it's really a techno-economic analysis right now at a combined heat and power facility we have at Clemson University, where we would start looking at burning hydrogen in a kind of gas turbine. So we start blending it with methane. And, so it's really in a techno-economic analysis right now, but then we're also looking at going forward, actually doing some electrolysis there where we use, some sort of renewable generator, could be solar, could just be electric from the grid, to break apart water and then burn that hydrogen and start blending it either in natural gas pipelines or right location, So that's kind of where I was really looking at the hydrogen piece was more as a fuel to burn in a turbine. And when I was mentioning the batteries, it was more just a battery that is going to, either provide grid ancillary services or energy shifting or renewable smoothing for the bulk system.
Yeah. I think kind of just a more kind of general questions. I don't pretend to be any expert in that area. We've got to be careful when we look at technologies to talk about deploying technologies which can have an impact in a short-term horizon. Yeah, there's a lot of technologies which will be researched, which will come to market, but 2050, carbon reduction targets are way too far out. 2035 targets are way too far out. We need to be extending technology in a very large way that works now, that is deployable and cost effective to everybody. Rather than getting, to put it bluntly, distracted by R&D projects that might arrive when the house is burnt down.
Thanks for your take on that. Go ahead, Jacek.
I would like to add to this, and also, because of course we, with climate change, will have a lot of damage. U.S. has annually $100 billion of damage because of climate change already. So this, we, as far as we can keep the costs of the electricity and energy aside, there are costs which the society itself will have to bear. There will be an insurance company which will be liable to pay for the damages. So my question is, what is the opinion about the tax, carbon tax, really, which is, this is one of the propositions, how to account for the costs related to climate change, really, and include it somehow into the cost of energy production and make the field, make it more market-driven, real market-driven base. So I would like to know what is what are the opinions of the speakers?
Wow, I don't have an answer for you directly to that particular question. I can tell you that what other states are bouncing around and what the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is looking at, is going to be viewed, at least by our legislature, as very punitive to Kentucky, and it has the potential to really erode these very cheap electricity rates that we've had for a number of years. So we probably do need for our utilities to be looking more at playing in the market. As of now, we have very few utilities who are in PJM or any of the other RTOs that might touch on Kentucky. And so I think that there has to be a market balance there. I'm not sure that Kentucky's going to be able to play well with others in that particular arena. So that's, that's as far as I can go right now. But if somebody has an answer for me and has a way that we can make this work for Kentucky with, given the percentage of fossil fuels that we're burning right now, let me know, because I really would like to see a solution on the very short-term horizon.
Yeah, so if I can just add that, of course, I understand that this will affect the jobs and the attractive, how attractive Kentucky is really for even for the industry. So I totally understand this issue, and I know that low energy costs were always the main driver for the industry. But on the other hand, we have now new administration, federal administration, with this huge infrastructure plan. And my question is whether, of course, the federal government understands that there are differences between the states. And I wonder whether Kentucky wants to somehow tap to this $2 trillion infrastructure bill to maybe upgrade and help to develop renewable energy sources?
We would take the money. Yes, yes. We would love to see Kentucky be the beneficiary of that. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to weigh the perspectives of the various states in doling out the money. I think there's a lot that we can do here that will help us a bit, but it's kind of a wait and see attitude, I guess, right now. Just to, number one, see if the infrastructure bill makes it through intact. And second, then we've already put our pitch in for what we would need in order to benefit the state in that way. But whether that comes to fruition or not, I have no idea.
Okay, I have one for Steve. I think you were pretty clear in your presentation about net metering and the value of one-to-one for the solar industry. But aside from net metering, I'm wondering what do you think are some of the most important policy changes that could be made in Kentucky to help the short-term growth of solar in the state?
Yeah, I think there's a debate raging as well about land use and solar, and clearly if we are going to deploy large scale utility solar, and I'm sure Duke and others share some of these feelings, we have got to get to a compromise and streamlined process that reduce the cost of building kind of large scale solar and make it something that can be done in a reasonable time frame rather than being locked up in litigation, sometimes for years on end. So I think almost the argument has transferred from an argument over net metering to an argument about land use and preserving our valuable farmlands, which I'm always a little bit skeptical of. I can say these things, because I'm sure sometimes if a farmer is approached by a developer who will build houses, he or she will be saying yes to that, but may pause more if it's solar. So I think land use, zoning is clearly an area which is messy, is local, and hampers large-scale utility kind of solar growth would be my most immediate area. I think the other is, and this is more a policy kind of response, I think we have to challenge our cities to do more than they're doing. When I look around this region and I look at the commitments that the city of Cincinnati is making, for instance, to solar just up the river to run their water treatment system, to build 25 megawatt systems, providing energy at the same cost as current kind of utility prices. Indianapolis, Bloomington with 5 megawatts, what may be going on in Tennessee. Our cities talk a good game, applaud other people's leadership, but when it comes to do anything, take a very rapid step back.
Yeah, there's I was just going to add one thing to that. One thing we're looking at, we don't have a whole, geographically, we're kind of limited in where we are in Kentucky, being kind of just the greater Cincinnati, kind of northern Kentucky area. But, we are evaluating a project in Kentucky right now and also doing this in our other territories of, looking at land that might not have another use. I mean, covered land is a great area that we are looking at. We're evaluating one in Kentucky right now for that and in other services too. Taking land that you're not going to build houses on a landfill. So why not repurpose that for, some use, coal ash, landfills that we have. We're looking at that as well. Can you repurpose those for, it's a nice story if you could cover those and add solar to them.
Yeah. And in addition to the coal ash landfills, we also have a significant amount of mine-scarred land in Kentucky, in the Appalachian region. The problem there is, of course, slope. But as I mentioned, we have this solar site suitability tool that we now have where we can identify parcels of about 250 to 300 acres that have not too great a slope and would appear to be suitable for some solar development. So that was seen as a great need. So we've now, we're going to roll that out. Actually, we tested it last week. It worked beautifully. We're running some other tests and educating some stakeholders about how this thing works. And so we'd love to see some development on those lands too, to bring additional jobs to Eastern Kentucky, maybe in the construction of a solar field, but also to perhaps attract some medium-sized businesses to that area too, where unemployment is just so great. So I'm all in on that one, and I'll help you find a site if you want to come to Kentucky.
I mean, one other thought, Josh, and I kind of touched on this in the last pages of my presentation, and this is a big one, and it's not going to happen, frankly, but 38% of our residents can't access solar because they're renters, or their properties are not suitable for solar. There is no public option in a monopoly utility state to develop community solar. So we've taken out more than a third of the ability to transition our citizenship to solar by virtue of that. And that's massive. And yes, there are some utility community solar initiatives, but when you look at the purchase price per unit in those, it's often not that attractive versus what other developers could do. So there's a lot to be said for the free market to drive down costs in that area, but we have a monopoly utility state.
Thanks.
And the last one is just on jobs. We're talking about massive solar development just for our citizens here. Who's going to do the work? We have minimal solar workforce. We have no formal training for solar in this state. So there's a huge danger that we will see a solar boom that draws in workforce from other states that then take the economic benefit home. And I think that'll be a very sorry thing to happen.
I think you're right.
Those are great points. Thank you. That was a great discussion. And we just got a question from our audience as well that I think is a wonderful one to do at this point. And if you guys have enough to say about it, it might be the last one I ask, but I'll go ahead and read this. And it basically says, this whole situation, this challenge is obviously very complicated. So it's easy for most people to feel disconnected from these solutions. So what can we do? What are recommendations from the panel on individual level actions that can be taken by Kentuckians to affect the way energy use and climate change occur? I think Steve already addressed that at the end of his talk, so I'd like the other two to maybe focus on that first, and then Steve, if you have any additional thoughts you want to put in as well.
Sure.
The point I would make to this audience is that number one, you need to vote, and you need to vote for people who share your vision of what climate change should look like. So that's probably the most important thing. The second thing is that on your local level, and especially on the state level, you need to speak with your legislators because, as has been pointed out here by several people, our legislature is not necessarily, 110% behind solar. And so if you want to see some of these renewables get real traction in the state, then some of the prohibitions that exist in either the PSC's regulations or other statutes in Kentucky, tax laws, whatever the impediment is, needs to be actually addressed face-to-face with the legislator. So talk to your legislator. And I think that's the single most important thing that we can do.
Well, yeah, I can kind of take maybe a different angle on that, outside of the policy side. But, I kind of showed some of the, really what's ways to get to net zero. But we just need people who are, especially in school right now, from a technology standpoint, people in the engineering fields, to really, you can get a pretty exciting career in this. I mean, there's a lot going on right now, a lot of challenges. Again, I mentioned, solar and wind and battery storage, we're kind of limited where we are right now. We need new technologies. We need R&D. We need people focusing their career in engineering to kind of get into the clean energy space because it's really exciting, a huge challenge, and you can really make an impact by doing work in this space. But we need people coming out of school who are kind of passionate about clean energy to kind of get into this field and, kind of help us meet some of these technology challenges that we really need to address.
Yeah, I mean, just to cap that off, I mean, to Rebecca's point, it is, I mean, mundane as it may seem, informing and talking to your legislator. And I've probably met with, most of them in kind of Frankfurt, and they know very little about solar, understandably, because they've got 1,000 things to know about. Get it on their agenda. When they hear your voice, it informs and directs their decision. And same applies to councillors, same applies to city mayors. If they're not being asked about it, it's not on their agenda. Simple as that. And I'd say back to the community bit, and I'll give you an example of this. Year before last, 3 people, because they wanted to cause a change, put together a community solar drive in Lexington and got 30 buildings converted to solar. Not going to change the world, but that's 3 people who wanted to be busy and make a difference, converted 30 buildings. If we're doing that in every city, how much more could we do? So small local actions can be really impactful.
Great. And as Zach just mentioned, by the way, the need for people to be getting educated in renewable energy and all this, and that's a good opportunity for a self-serving point here from the Conn Center to mention that we have created a new master's series program to do exactly that, in a 1-year program to really educate people at a high level on how all these renewable energy technologies work. But that's a good segue as well for me to ask my next question to all of you, but still a general one, very relevant to our audience, which is to say, what advice would you have for the young people watching this who might be interested in getting into a renewable energy career based on the experience you've had?
I can kind of start with that, but I just wanted to kind of address, I see this question in the chat too, about parking lots. And that's a great location. How it gets paid for is a whole other thing. Does the utility own it, put in base rates? Is it, the individual putting canopies? But we've done a number of parking canopy projects, and it's a great use of space. And not only that, people love having covered parking. So, I mean, if you, one area which is close to Kentucky, if you haven't, I actually work out of our Cincinnati office. When I went into the office, I work out of my office in my house. But the Cincinnati Zoo has got a couple megawatts of solar canopy parking over its parking, and it's huge, but it's a great location for it. But with regards to, getting into it, you can mention that. I mean, one thing, there's a lot of new programs there at universities focused on sustainability, focused on kind of engineering around this area. I think, even in the utility, there's a lot of exciting work to be done here. But there's industries such as APRI that really focus on kind of R&D that we work with closely. So there's a lot of opportunities in the clean energy space right now.
I would also say that the Education Cabinet and Workforce Development Department of that cabinet are looking at curriculum-based solutions to identify and perhaps urge some of our community colleges and others to develop rather quickly some good programs to feed people, feeder programs into these types of jobs. And so that's going to be very important. I would also say that, state government has a ton of internships. And so if you are really, really interested in coming to work for our Office of Energy Policy, or coming to work in environmental protection, and looking at how some of these issues kind of feed into other issues concerning the use of our resources and our environment, then, contact the cabinet, call us. I think my number's online, unfortunately, but you're welcome to call me and mention this particular event. And, we're always looking for people who want to come in and do some internships with us. So we'd love to introduce you to the policymaking side of it.
I mean, from a practical marketplace point of view, I cannot hire enough people to put solar on roofs. Hiring trade people in Kentucky, skilled trade people, in any part of the industry, not just solar, is a really kind of tough thing. The thing I like about solar, and as an employer, is it's still an industry that's young enough to accept all comers, and we get one of the nice things is you get a lot of people opting in from other career paths who want to be here for ethical or environmental or whatever reason. And you can almost restart people again in their kind of dream job. But I think, what we need to do is find a way to value trade skills more. Perhaps look at people who don't need the level of education that we think they do sometimes to come into those trade jobs, because they can come in and be paid exceedingly well without debt levels most people have to experience. So it's about valuing those practical skills, finding career paths for those skills, because they are deeply needed and there's a massive shortage.
Thanks. I'm curious, what do you think are the prospects for getting the people for those jobs from the same areas of Kentucky that are currently losing careers because of the slow decline of coal in this state?
Yeah, it's something we've certainly kind of looked at, and we worked a little bit with MACID, or now the Mountain Association, on that. Solar, to a degree, as you would expect, follows the population kind of density. So you see more of it around a kind of, a metro kind of area. But saying that, and we talk about Kentucky having cheap energy rates, some of the most expensive energy rates are actually down in Eastern Kentucky. I mean, if you live in Louisville or Lexington, somebody down in Hazard or Pineville or Paintsville is paying 40% more than you are in Lexington for their energy. So we shouldn't think everything is rosy by any means out in the rural areas. I think as some of those big utility projects come in, they are naturally going to go in those areas, and you'll be looking at 200, 300, 400 people involved in long-term construction projects there. I think that's going to be the most obvious route. Building small and medium solar companies in those areas where there aren't the population base to drive the need is a tougher one. But utility will cause large employment in solar in that area, but they've got to have the skills, and it'll be a chicken and egg situation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The energy burden in Eastern Kentucky, I think, is about probably at least double what it is elsewhere on those households. So it's a very real problem.
Yeah.
Jacek, do you have any last questions you want to ask? We're coming up on 4.
I mean, my one question, which probably is not really a good moment, but other ways of maybe addressing climate change is the infrastructure of public transportation, which is not really very well developed here in Kentucky. So maybe this is really a question for Secretary Goodman, if she knows about any plans of developing public transit here.
Well, it just so happens. I, in my prior life, of course, I've worked for government for about 40 years, but my last major job in government in the transportation world was as general counsel for the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. And during the Louisville Bridges project, building those 2 bridges, we used part of that money first for environmental justice, and to ensure that people had ready access to transportation needs other than a tolled bridge. And so we bought a couple of electric buses, I think, for TARC, and we also, I think, have facilitated the purchasing through certain transportation funds in Kentucky, the purchasing of some other electric buses. But as you know, we are not public transportation people. It is very difficult to find widespread use of transportation systems like that in Kentucky. So I guess until that changes, we'll continue to buy buses. That seems to be the only route. But we're really, really excited about electric vehicles right now, and about all of the automakers, and we're getting a lot of inquiries from people who want to do batteries for them, who want to build cars. We get calls every week, so we're really excited to see that the automotive industry is changing. And of course, we've got some big automotive manufacturers here in the state. So Toyota and Ford both, I think, are looking at their plans for EVs. So that's going to help immensely toward climate change. I mean, that may be the single biggest thing that Kentucky gets to do. So.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I think we are exactly 4 p.m. right now. This is probably a good time to wrap up this discussion. So my final question would be to the speakers for any final thoughts or remarks.
Thanks for having us today.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I'll go back to one of my first points is, we need to act, and we need to act quickly.
And I'll just go back to contact your legislature.
Yeah.
Whoever your legislator is, and talk to somebody else's legislator as well. You can't educate them enough. So
I totally agree. I mean, this is probably the most impactful way any single citizen can act, just to support people who share their vision for the seats. Yeah. So yeah, here I would like to thank everyone, especially the speakers, and everyone who helped to put this event together. And I hope this starts the dialogue which we really need here in Kentucky, because that's a very pressing challenge, and probably the biggest challenge of our lifetime. So hopefully Kentucky will get involved in addressing this challenge, at least according to our means and capabilities. And hopefully this will also inspire new generation of leaders and people who will be driving this whole change. So this is my final word, and Josh may add his comments.
Well, you took my final words almost exactly word for word. So I will second most of what Jacek said, and sincere thank you to our 3 panelists for hosting this dynamic talk about such an important topic. And just finish by saying to all of our audience that clearly this is a big problem that will take everyone working together with some sense of urgency to solve these climate issues. So I hope you learned something from this. I hope you had some questions that were answered. And as Jacek said, I hope it inspired you to do something, whether you're talking to your legislators or working on a local level to try to get solar put on one particular location where you think it would really make a difference. Any of those small things add up to big changes. So thank you everyone for participating. This was a pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.